Howdy everyone. Having taken quite a long break and breath, in fact, since I began with the Shmakov readings, Shmakov being Holy Book of Thoth, and having nearly blown my own mind just reading out the Magician, the Arcana are pretty long. I thought I might try a different approach for helping people to get into Shmakov and penetrate this complex but incredibly revealing teaching. So what I've done is summarised, first of all, the very long introduction, which is really useful for obviously helping us to understand the whole thing. And then, given the supreme importance of the 021 Arcanum, which is the Fool. Sorry, my camera's at a funny angle. Which is the Fool. I'm going to then jump to certain teachings around the Fool, because this is really the key to the whole thing, as I've mentioned before. The Fool, 021, Shin, is the key to this Arcana. So, I'm going to read out from a document I've prepared, and I've lost my camera now. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'll begin with a quote which is at the start of the book from Stanislas de Guaita, who some of you may have realised by now is quoted at great length in Shmakov's book. And he says, "I welcome the brave researchers and deep thinkers who, by applying positive science methods to the hyperphysical world, have established the indestructible foundation of the synthetic monument of human knowledge and laid the first stone of the Majestic Temple where it will be celebrated. And this hour is near, the solemn reconciliation of the warring sisters, science and faith." And then, from Spinoza, another great thinker who's quoted at length here, "All ideas are true because they are related to God." About the types of human cognition. Being in extension in the supreme transcendental reality, it is the primary substance and defines the universal basic principles. In its ultimate transcendental abstractness, it is the nature of the idea of deity. In its ultimate differentiated affirmation, it defines the nature of the cosmos, both in its aggregate generality and in its differentiated creation. The world of differentiated being is defined in contrast to the absolute world as a field of different intensity of consciousness, so that the general cosmic consciousness has a created nature in contrast to the integral consciousness of the transcendental absolute world. As Plutarch says, "The true servant of Isis is he or she who, having rightly received the doctrine of divine things, will analyse it with reason and enter into the truths which it contains with the spirit." Intuition is a property inherent in all people. It stands among other means of perception and cognition, but by its nature it has a primary importance. It is among them prima inter pares. Intuition is always subjective. Moreover, it is the most subjective of all human perceptual faculties, but this last property is the only category that asserts its relativity. The subjectivism of intuition is reduced entirely to the colouring of the data it receives, and these data, as direct emanations of synthesis, are by their own nature quite absolute. As a person improves, the sense of synthesis develops, and with the help of it, a person begins to correct these intuitions, making them more and more independent of their own personality. The final development of the combined intuition and sense of synthesis results in revelation. the highest cognitive faculty, in its entirety inherent only in the purest spirit. These revelations are always superpersonal, that is, they are equally in harmony with every individual, known in their pure nature only by the consciousness of the spirit. They are clothed in the form of a higher earthly individuality. They correspond to an entire era of world history and a whole family of peoples. The latter is summed up by the formula, revelation is the intuition of the race. Each arcanum has its own symbolic correspondences in the most diverse areas of human knowledge. The decimal number system, through the introduction of the concept of zero, which gives the unit a new meaning in a higher order, directly stems from the Arcana system in the aspect of its interpretation by Kabbalah in the Sephiroth system. The alphabets of all the oldest languages of the earth are directly derived from the Arcana system, and the birth of Kabbalism, in the narrow sense of the word, the symbolism of letters, seems to be the first consequences of this connection. With clear, sharp edges, the Arcana system is divided into three parts. The first is Arcanum XXI, the Fool, which speaks of the deity and the world and their fusion in the absolute, the essence of the divine, the Ein Sof of Kabbalah, the not that of Hinduism. The second part consists of 21 arcana, which speak about the whole person, about his or her birth from the absolute, and the principles of his existence, which determine the synthesis and meaning of his life. The last 56 arcana, in contrast to the first, the major, are called minor. They make up the third and last part of the great book and speak about the nature of things and man as a member and link in the integral life of the universe. This single absolute division of the Book of Wisdom is interpreted in its general symbol, that is, a square with a triangle inside and a dot in the middle. The point, like the zero, is a natural symbol of the absolute, which is forever and in principle inaccessible to our understanding. The zero is higher than any number. It contains all numbers in itself, and at the same time it is forever inaccessible to understanding and is known only by approximation. The triangle is a symbol of reality. Everything that exists is known by man in his turners. Everything else is an abstract form of thought that comes to life insofar as it is given life by the Turner principle, which is the only and natural emblem of being. The square is a symbol of the world of realization, the world of illusion Maya, which is based on four natural principles that realize both his very existence as such and determine the course of his entire life. The only reality, true and immutable, is revealed to the probing spirit of man in the form of a system of 21 great arcana that make up the second part of the Holy Book of Thoth. And these are from Arthiog's deck. We can only approach the first part insofar as we will synthesize together the knowledge obtained from the second. The third part will become accessible to understanding insofar as we will be able to apply the general principles drawn from the second to the world around us. Thus, the path to knowledge is one. It is completely absolute for each person and is revealed to the spirit by the divine light of the 21 great arcana. As Plato says, even true opinions are not worth much until someone connects them with a link of causal reasoning. The first 10 arcana are the world's cosmogony. Arcanum I, the Magician, teaches about the unity of the universal spirit and its transcendental existence. Arcanum II, so that's Arcanum I. Arcanum II is the doctrine of its internal homogeneous transcendental consciousness. And Arcanum XXIII reveals the doctrine of the divine nature as the created consciousness of the cosmic spirit, which in relation to the external phenomenal nature is the source of its generation. Arcanum IV is the doctrine of the Logos as a set of individual monads emanating outside the undifferentiated divine unity for the possibility of independent self-affirmation of individual primordial aspects of reality. That was the Emperor. Arcanum V, the Hierophant, teaches about the consciousness and individuality of a separate monad, about the split and vortex, the nature of consciousness. Arcanum VI, the Lovers, is the teaching about the cosmic family of monads and the similarity of the world to the deity. Arcanum VII, the Chariot, is the teaching about the monad as a self-asserting archetype. Arcanum VIII, Justice, teaches about the laws of personality and superpersonal nature. Arcanum IX, the Hermit, about man as an established archetype. Arcanum X, the World, about the world as a stable and closed vortex, the established created nature of the deity. The first 10 arcana lie in the world of principles and represent the supreme transcendental doctrines which together reveal to man the inner hidden essence of the universe. These arcana are inextricably linked to each other, pour out one into the other, and only in their full totality represent a complete picture and, moreover, a complete and a closed one. The second 10 arcana are related to the first by the strict law of analogy and are active cosmic figures who implement the doctrines of the first cycle. The first 10 arcana are the teachings of the world of the spirit. The second 10 arcana teach about the cosmic environment and, thanks to this, each cycle illuminates the world from only one point of view inherent in it. Arcanum 0 or 21 and Arcanum 22 together. I'm not sure where that is in the pack. Oh yeah, here it is. That's the world. So 21 and 22 together represent the final synthesis. Whilst Arcanum 0 is the teaching of the absolute world first cause of the one reality, Arcanum 21 is the self-consciousness of reality in the aspect of a single spirit dreaming of its Maya, and therefore this arcanum synthesizes the cycle of the first 10 arcana. Arcanum 22 is a self-consciousness of reality in the aspects of the world environment, a single phenomenal quasi-reality, and therefore this arcanum is a synthesis of the second 10 arcana. Arcanum 0 is the doctrine of the universal absolute, of the supreme universal first cause, of the source of all being. Its teaching is a set of transcendental doctrines that lie higher than the very principle of reason, and therefore this supreme teaching is revealed by the Holy Book of Thoth in the form of a set of extreme contradictions imprinted on the hieroglyph of this arcanum. Indeed, he reveals to us the height of the mountain, which can equally indicate both victory and domination over the earth, and isolation and alienation from it. On the edge of a cliff is a traveller, but who can say whether he is facing the end of a long journey or will soon perish in the abyss? He is dressed in rags, but do they not adorn the prophet and the tramp alike? He looks into the distance as if not seeing the abyss that yawns beneath his feet, which can equally indicate both the madness of the traveller and the achievement of complete power, for which there can be no danger. Behind the shoulders of the traveller in the bag are the attributes of a magician: a sword, a cup, and a sickle. I think that means coin or wand. The traveller carries them as useless possessions, but why? Is it because he does not know the true value of his burden, does not even suspect it, or because he knows too much to feel the need for these external signs of power? At the edge of the cliff lies an obelisk in the dust, the emblem and the guardian of wisdom. The traveller does not look at it, but is it because, like a fool, he does not know its value, or because, having understood everything, he also knows what the obelisk says, and therefore for him it is only a dead stone? Behind the obelisk, Typhon is seen lurking, a huge crocodile with an open mouth. Rags of clothing are also torn by the dog, but the traveller does not pay attention to any of it, whether because he does not understand the danger or because he ignores it. The entire hieroglyph of Arcanum XXI is thus full of binary contradictions. Even more so, it is itself a classically expressed binary. With a clear, definitely conscious edge, Arcanum XXI is divided into a binary, a madman and a perfect magician. This is the highest binary polarity which is embedded in the framework of the human mind. Man cannot imagine a greater contrast, a greater contradiction in principle. This binary is for him the highest available analogue of the first cause, which is first of all the totality of all antinomies. A person can approach the study of the great arcana from many different sides. Even more, there are as many ways of understanding them as there are people, because each person has his own path, the diversity of which increases with the development of people. In the beginning, it concerns only the form of perception and stems from the fact that the knowledge of individual people is always only in some limit. The rest of the knowledge of different people is different. With the development of people, the breadth of their knowledge increases, they begin to complement each other, and, because of this, the difference in perception in their form decreases so much that at first glance it may seem that all these different paths begin to merge into one path. Reality is the opposite of this apparent phenomenon. With the increase of knowledge, the consciousness of the spirit gradually begins to awaken in a person, and in strict harmony with this, the gradual development of individuality takes place. The difference between undeveloped people arises only from the difference in their previous life. True individuality is revealed in the soul of a person in a conscious way only after a long and intense work, and serves as the best indicator of his rapid growth. From this it follows that general instructions about the best method and the most reasonable sequence of comprehension of the arcana can be given only for the first steps of a person, when his personal individuality is not yet developed so that the forms of thinking proposed by another person would, in principle, be deprived of the opportunity to serve him. In any case, however, this period cannot extend less than a whole series of years of intense work. That is why it is extremely important for any beginner to know in advance the most perfect and systematics of his work, because although he can come to it independently, but still it can be for him, if not impossible, then in any case very difficult. A person who is still deprived of independent thought should receive support, and this is given to him by an ancient tradition. Having used it completely, he can and should already plan his own path and put it into execution. As Eliphas Levi says, philosophy is sometimes transformed into a belief in order to become accessible to the masses. The person who will find in himself enough spiritual strength, who will really desire the immutable truth, who will be able to kindle in himself the unquenchable flame of striving for eternity, will be able to find everything that it is necessary to achieve. Seek the way by retreating more and more inward. Seek the way by stepping boldly outward. Don't look for it on one particular road. The path cannot be reached by righteousness alone, or by religious contemplation alone, or by ardent striving forward. Seek the path by trying all sorts of tests to understand the growth and meaning of individuality. You need to be a multi-stringed harp to play the harp of eternity. Okay, so that's all from the introduction, well, most of it. And now we come to the actual Shin, a part of the Shin, the full teaching. Radiatio, signum, materia, the fork, Shin. 0 is its number, or 300. So as we've said, the Holy Book of Thoth has as its symbol the supreme hieroglyph, a square, inside it a triangle, and in the middle a dot. The great arcana system of the tarot is a teaching of God, man and the universe, the one reality, the first cause. It is the incomprehensible wrong Brahman. The teaching about it is the doctrine of Arcanum XXI. Brahman is the absolute without a comprehensible relation to the manifest universe. Brahma is the first to produce the universe. Arcanum 0, 21 and 22 as a whole represent the supreme divine turner. Arcanum 0 as the doctrine of the highest synthesis is the integral of this turner. Arcanum 21 as the plus term of the binary, as a thesis, lies on the same axis of analogy with the integral. For our consciousness, which lies infinitely below the true nature of the arcana, both of them merge into one. Arcanum 21 becomes an aspect of Arcanum 0, from which it flows and is born, becoming an equal member of the arcana cycle. Arcanum 22, as the minus member of the binary, as the antithesis, has only an imaginary existence. Stemming from Arcanum 0, it is born together with Arcanum 21 as a corresponding member of the binary, for consciousness combined with the Arcanum cycle. Arcanum 0 as the doctrine of universal synthesis. The whole human being, illuminated by consciousness, all means of communication with the outside world, all the forces living in it, feelings, emotions, and the very laws of their life, development, and activity, equally have only a relative existence, only a conditional value. Living in himself by an internal movement, carried out by the relative movement of his parts, a person eternally changes in the light of his own consciousness, not only the appearance, qualities, and intensity of the elements that make him up, but also the very composition of them, which in the separation of a longer period of time can become completely different. In the midst of all this, grandiose mass of gravities and properties, inclinations and individual multicoloured forms, the human mind, probing and immediate in a consciousness, nevertheless leads man to the conviction of the unity of the original source, which is translated into this diverse host. The Atman of man, unknown and incomprehensible in its true nature and aims, is nevertheless known in every path of search, in every activity, in every aspect of the human being. Knowing the attributes, a person thereby reveals in his consciousness one after another individual properties, aspects of substance, and consistently builds on them an evolutionary chain of relative syntheses, thanks to which he gradually approaches the synthesis of the Absolute. All the arcana of the Book of Thoth are bound together by Arcanum 0, and the goal before our evolutionary consciousness is only to ensure in an immutable way that Arcanum 0 is identical with all the great arcana. Comparing each arcanum with Arcanum 1 in succession, we will inevitably be convinced of their identity, that each arcanum can be superimposed on Arcanum 0, all being aspects of the self, in a sort of nutshell. Following this path, we will clearly see that Arcanum 0 is indeed their general synthesis. not being able to grasp with our consciousness the whole set of doctrines and laws that we have already learned on the way to interpreting the Arcana cycle, we thus come to the final edge of our abilities, beyond which the cherished area of spirit consciousness already begins. Common to the entire Arcana cycle is the doctrine that the world is a phenomenal reflection of a single noumenal spirit in the waves of Maya. That is, in those extensions that correspond to the existence of specific groups of tonalities inherent in the type of manifestation of the spirit in each individual case. The world is therefore the cosmic dream of Brahman, which is confirmed by the division of its self-contemplation into, firstly, self-contemplation in itself in its single essence as a universal single synthesis. Self-contemplation in itself in its single essence as a universal single synthesis. And 2, into self-contemplation in its integral dream in the cosmic infinity of its individual dreams. Arcanum XXI is the doctrine of the self-contemplation of Brahman in the aspect of a single homogeneous spirit. Arcanum XXII is the doctrine of the self-contemplation of Brahman in the aspect of cosmic consciousness as a totality of consciousnesses of monads, all monads. In the aspect of Arcanum XXI, the creative being of Brahman is known in the being of individual monads. The monad, man, as the image and likeness of God by the power of his own power, asserts both his being as such and his categories, gravities, qualities, possibilities, and their very laws. In this aspect, the cosmos as such is an abstract concept. It exists insofar as it is revealed by individual substances, monads. Each of them creates its own relative world, independently of the others' lives in it, and knows itself. The cosmos as a whole is an a priori representation of the totality of these relative worlds. In the aspect of Arcanum XXII, the creative being of Brahman is known in the totality of its differential manifestations. Individual manifestations change in the cycle, pass from one to the other, but their cosmic totality is an absolute reality, for their relationships, gravities, categories, qualities, possibilities, and their laws flow directly from the creative power of the Brahman, and, acting on the aspects of his spirit, monads, which are only abstract representations, they are established according to the laws of harmony in their own consciousnesses. In this aspect, the cosmos is known as Brahman, the one reality, and the individual self-affirmation of the monads is represented as the result of the cosmic will of Brahman. Where there is a form, a limitation, and a relativity of being, there is also a limitation of being in time. Time, as the extension of phenomenal space, which determines its very nature, is a category necessarily inherent in it, without which the very concept of the phenomenality of being loses its meaning. The order of planes or worlds in metaphysical space is determined by degrees of freedom, that is, the presence of a larger or smaller number of coordinate constraints. Everything that is relative is mortal, everything that is absolute is eternal. Everything that our lower manas, the lesser mind, knows, everything is known by us temporarily. Everything will go into oblivion, will be forgotten as a momentary cast from the majestic course of world life. Our universe is limited in its existence both in the past and in the future. Arcanum XXI and Arcanum XXII, being the highest and only real cosmic divine binary, are in themselves the highest syntheses. Arcanum XXI, as a teaching about the self-contemplation of Brahman in its unity and its affirmation through individual will centres, is a synthesis of the first 10 Sephirothic Arcana of the Holy Book of Thoth. These 10 Arcana together exhaust the cosmogony of the universal spirit, the individual aspects of the self-contemplation of Brahman, their mutual connections and their mutual affirmations in each other. They are aspects of the Arcanum XXI, and the Brahman contains the whole successive chain of cosmic figures, the teachings of which are these Arcana. Arcanum XXII, as a teaching about the self-contemplation of the Brahman in his dream of the phenomenal nature and self-affirmation through the totality of individual dreams, is a synthesis of the second 10 arcana of the Holy Book of Thoth. These 10 arcana in their entirety exhaust the life of the universal spirit through self-contemplation in the totality of individual dreams, their mutual connections, and their mutual affirmation in each other. They are aspects of the Arcanum XXII, and the Brahman contains the whole successive chain of cosmic figures, the teachings of which are these arcana. Striving for higher synthesis, we must reveal in our consciousness that the Arcana 21 really contains the first decade of Arcana, and the Arcana 22 the second, in the final conclusion. Arcanum 21 is the doctrine of the self-contemplation of reality as such in the binaries revealed by it. Arcanum 22 is the doctrine of the self-contemplation of reality as such in the consciousness itself about the manifested. Arcanum 21 is the doctrine of the divine turner and self-contemplation in the turners. Arcanum 22 is the doctrine of the divine quaternary and self-contemplation in the quaternaries. Arcanum 0, reuniting the two arcana, is the doctrine of the septurner as the full realization of substance, the 3 plus the 4. Man, like the likeness of Brahman, knows it simultaneously in both aspects. In its super-existent unity in Arcana 21, and in its cosmic vastness in Arcana 22. According to his seventh dimensional essence, man is in himself a septurner, which is the highest definition of his being as such. He is triune in the divine world, and quadrupolar in the world of being. Elemental, you might say. By his likeness to Brahman, man closes the whole chain of the involutive self-contemplation of Brahman, and by asserting his own unity, he restores and confirms the unity and self-contemplation of Brahman. For this reason, royal science is the teaching of God, man, and the universe as three inseparable hypostases of the unity of cosmic vastness. This is the highest final synthesis of all royal knowledge. I've then jumped, after this kind of précis of the introduction and the full, to the extension Shmakov wrote to his book at the end, outside the arcana themselves, like an addendum. And in part of this, he talks about the nature of genius, which is obviously very, as we've heard, the madness and the genius is linked to the figure of the fool. And it's how we can start to understand this manifestation in the human being. Genius, he says, is the true aristocracy of the spirit. It is precisely the state in which, when confronted with a lower environment, the higher power unfolds all its greatness in it. Every medium, whatever it may be, is only a material to which the genius strives, gives some form or other. The life of human societies is not the result of the total aspirations of the crowd, for they are always contradictory and self-defeating. On the contrary, they are all, both as a whole and in individual cases, governed by that supreme centre which is the soul of the people. These changes, although they are actually made by the integrity of the people's soul, are at the same time externally carried out through the medium of individuals. It is these chosen ones who gather, as if in focus, all the popular power that has sometimes accumulated on the path of entire centuries, and, directing it where they want, cause this or that change in popular activity. That is why, although the course of world life is accomplished by the totality of the whole mass of efforts of all individual people, at the same time this process remains directly hidden from the eyes of the historian, and only individual titans of human thought, spirit, or feeling rise up before his eyes as active figures. It is these geniuses who control the course of world history, supporting it in one direction or another, and cause certain changes. That is why the appearance of every genius is the end of an old era and the beginning of a new one. The main sign of genius is originality. Originality, independence, and the impossibility of imitating it. These properties impose on the whole appearance of the genius, in comparison with the ordinary person, a very special colour. While every person seeks confirmation of his words outside of himself, and, having been convinced of their value, always strives to convince others, genius, on the contrary, has the criterion of truth in itself, and not only does not need external confirmation of its conclusions, but on the contrary, avoids communication with the outside world. This conclusion leads us to the possibility of giving the following gradations of genius. Genius can be potential and active. Genius, first of all, is a synonym for the enormous development of individuality. Because of this, the activity of a genius, his thinking and constructions are always extremely saturated with his inherent individuality, and therefore very difficult to be perceived by other people. Genius is always superior to modernity, and not in form but in essence, so that even in the absence of individualization, his thinking would be accessible only to a select few. Finally, having self-consciousness, the genius has before him such an abyss of all kinds of problems and questions that he does not feel entitled to take up teaching, both because of the natural modesty that arises from the consciousness of the presence of a huge mass of the unknown, and from the natural desire to know it. Thanks to all this, every genius realizes with complete clarity that he cannot be understood by people, and that any sermon, except for taking time off from work, will only bring you suffering. At the same time, he also understands that the difficulty of communication does not arise from easily removed obstacles, but from the deepest and most immutable reasons which he cannot change. That is why the idea that natural genius is potential genius, that is, hidden by man and existing only for himself, is really true. There are many more such geniuses than one might think, but quite understandably, history cannot know about them. Moving on to the second kind of genius, active genius, we must conclude a priori that, being an external manifestation of potential genius, the active must have the potential to manifest itself in a certain binary. In order for a genius to decide to enter the arena of history, it is necessary that there be an impulse. This impulse is the consciousness of the mission, that is, a clear understanding of the need to fulfill a particular purpose. Both members of the binary of active genius are equally based on this basic principle, but at the same time, it is from this principle that they become different from each other. A person can have a sense of community with the universe in two ways. In the first place, man may be conscious of himself as some well-defined factor in the general economy of nature, who performs the work inherent in him solely from his own motives, the concrete properties of which are derived from his individuality. The end result is the automatic product of all actions and counteractions, and therefore each person, once he does his job, may not care about the result. Secondly, a person can only be aware of himself as an instrument of the higher will, and therefore, by relegating his individuality to the background, he can make decisions in each individual case, deducing them not from his conscious being, but from the properties of the experiences with which he has to meet. These two types of active genius, being very close to each other in this initial synthesis, then quickly diverge in opposite directions and become polar extremes, creating a certain binary. From the definition of the first type of genius, it immediately follows that, having it, a person will first of all direct all efforts to fully identify and formalize in his consciousness his own being and its boundaries. Only when a person has become a well-defined quantity, fully understood his properties and his aspirations, can he begin to carry out his mission, which in this case will result in the desire to establish and spread the influence of a certain specific and well-defined ideal. Bless you. Having set a certain goal in his soul, such a person will both strive for it himself and attract to this aspiration all those who only listen to his voice. So the main feature of this type of genius is a narrowly concrete, fully revealed, clearly formed consciousness of its mission. Such a person is not set by a universal ideal, absolute and perfect for all people and all times, but tends only to a particular aspect of it, seeks to develop only some of its aspects. Such a person does not hear, or even cannot hear, any other voice that contradicts him from outside, because everything that does not harmonize with him does not reach his consciousness at all. From such a consciousness is fanaticism, to fanaticism is only a step, and most of the geniuses of this order were fanatics of a single and isolated idea. From the definition of the second type of active genius, it follows that these people did not set an ideal in their souls, but only an aspiration. They did not foresee that they would pursue in their affairs what definite goals their spirit would gravitate towards, what truths they would strive to establish in their hearts. The genius of this kind was the personification of a pure, proud spirit, restless and flaming, longing for the mountain country, eager to see the eternal truth, but never predestining what exactly it would be. The appearances of such people were moments of high exaltation, of tremendous search and longing of the soul, stormy, changeable, inconstant in form, but inflexible in essence. Being in the world, getting into certain conditions of life, such a person adapted to what he met. He did not change anything, did not alter anything, especially did not create anything, and did not destroy anything. With his ardent aspiration, he only poured infinite power into the search of other people. He communicated to them the invincibility of faith in their cause, gave them a clear consciousness that they were not alone on the path of search. You must have somebody in mind here, I think. Comparing these two types of genius, we are convinced that, being in one aspect opposite, in the other they merge, but at the same time, both in one and in the other, the first confirms the existence of the second and vice versa. The phenomenon of genius, whatever it may be, is the result of the sacrifice of a high being who brings his consciousness for a certain group of his elements into our world. Whatever genius may be, it is never a product of the environment, but rather serves as a natural personification of some aspect of the absolutely perfect synthesis that exists for this group. As an emanation of the Supreme Centre, he rises immeasurably above the people among whom he lives, and his appearance is always singular, always independent, and full of self-sufficient power, like the radiant appearance of a glittering meteor. It is beyond the comprehension of men, for only an equal can know an equal. Misunderstanding always gives rise to anger and hatred, and that is why the appearance of any genius is an explosion of the fierce hatred of the crowd. The path of the geniuses, as it has always been and always will always be a path of suffering. The high being, demiurge, who gives birth to genius in the veil of the earth, knows with complete clarity what he will have to endure, and therefore the manifestation of genius in the world reveals in all its immeasurable grandeur the law of sacrifice. Remember the hanged man. Being equally the product of a higher power, both types of genius differ not only in form, but also in the entire depth of their being. The first kind of genius is the identification outside of some aspect of the demiurge for the affirmation and perception of the potentially inherent individual consciousness. Up to that time, no matter how developed this group of elements was, and no matter how the latter were in harmony with each other, it was still only an abstract concept. In order to translate it into reality, it emanates into the outside and then appears to our eyes in the form of a genius with a specific ideal fulfilling its mission. On the path of the life of the genius, Suffering is constrained by the disparate possibilities of this particular composition, which thus returns to the integral being of the demiurge in the form of a fully established relative synthesis, an aspect of the synthesis of the Absolute. The second kind of genius is the identification of its complete counterpart in the outside world by a high being. The latter becomes a completely independent being, taking one form or another in strict accordance with the environment in which it should be. Like every ear-likeness of the Atman, this analogue objectively reveals only those potencies of its own that are caused by the inductive action according to the laws of harmony of all environmental factors, and therefore it becomes a natural personification of their general synthesis, projected into the plane of being and activity of the elements. Striving for their maximum, both forms of genius approach each other and in the end merge. In fact, if a person fulfills a specific mission on the path of his life, then this latter will be of a narrowly personal nature only insofar as it is imperfect, because as it develops, the goal of such a mission embraces more and more new complexes of factors, and therefore will gradually perceive all the greatness of absoluteness. In the same way, if a person comes into the world only with a pure desire for heaven, without any preconceived decisions and results in a form that it is only an echo of all the external gravities of this environment, then in turn, the higher the personal power of this person, the more colourful the fruit of his mission will be. The more it will be imbued with universal greatness. Thus, both types of genius lead to the development of cosmic consciousness in man and prepare him for the universal mission. The point where both kinds of totality merge together defines the dignity of the Great Initiate. The Great Initiate is the highest degree of human development, which determines the limit of his being in the form when he can still be given the name of a person. He unites all polarities, whatever they may be, with complete and absolute perfection, and becomes a truly living likeness of the Hierophant of Arcanum XXII, masculine in the grandeur of his knowledge, and feminine in the softness of his forms and the tenderness of his applications. The two kinds of genius are the same eternal question about the great binary of the human soul. The Son of the sun and the earth is the purest form of the first kind of genius, the Son of water and air of the second. Combining in a synthesis that is common and absolute to them, these two types of man unite in goals and draw to unity on the way all the diverse aspects of the dualism of the human soul. So, I was going to say more about the letter Shin and the Shin elements, and how this element is manifesting in certain individuals at work in our world now. And I was particularly going to relate this to some of the most pressing world affairs centred on Russia and the Ukraine. But I won't, as I've been talking for quite a long time now, I won't name them yet. But I just want to throw this out there for next time, when I hope to look at the invincible Shin and the concept of the fool's hat and the importance of controlling the hat, that when you're wielding the power of Shin, this can be an unstable force and can quickly flip, so that from wielding it, it turns upon you. And the difference between putting the hat of the fool on another person and having them put the hat on you is huge. And what happens there depends upon the personal power of the individual in question and their ability to wield the Shin, the magic wand. And it's a hair's breadth if you think about how a flame flickers. Okay, next time.